share the chat if you want.
Some streamers aren't live yet. It's okay.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm live.
Okay,
I am now live.
Can anyone hear us?
Yeah.
Can anyone hear us?
I'm live. We're good.
No countdown today, guys. We're trying out Stream Together, and it's an adventure for sure. But we seem to have it all working now. It just took us a little bit of extra time. We were trying to get some like screen sharing stuff set up, and it didn't really work for me for some reason. So instead, you just get to see my screen, as I will just follow people around. And the big thing is, I guess I should give an overview of what this stream is. That would be useful.
Agreed.
Obviously, you guys have seen all the elite specs. Teapot wants to say something. Go for it.
Oh no, I just said agreed. I said agreed.
Agreed.
It's a
Yeah,
good
that is
overview.
So obviously we've done all the previews, but this is more of an opportunity to have like a second look or an additional pre-beta look where Taylor and I are here hanging out with SNEB and MightyTeapot on Stream Together. So we have some prepared questions, and we're going to kind of go on some, there's room for the chat to ask questions, and if you ask a really good question, we'll probably answer it. If you just want to like rage in the chat and say CMC, I don't like you, we probably won't respond to that. But you can try, I guess. And the idea is that it's more of just like a casual conversation between like some devs and some content creators, and we have some questions prepared, and we have some winging it for sure going to be happening. And the first part of that was even getting the stream set up. But I think we are here and ready to go if anyone has things.
First question, where's Roy? Where's Roy? Where's Roy? That's the main question.
Where is Roy? Maybe he'll call in. He can call in, right? Let's stream together.
I'll knock.
I have a quick. You guys can hear me, right? Okay. Apparently, people. I can't tell if people troll when they're like, "Sneb's mic is low." This is like a classic streamer problem. But what I wanted to say, just very quickly, is that this is very experimental. We're trying out some new tech with the Stream Together stuff, so please go a bit easy on us. We're going to make this a bit of a casual conversation, have some fun, but know that there will probably be a few little bugs along the way, and that's just part of how we're trying to learn this new stuff.
SNEB is so loud.
I fixed it. Mostly. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, good. Yes, obviously we can't have Discord blur our webcam backgrounds today because we are on Stream Together, so you can see my office in full glory. There's still a sheet covering my wife's desk, and there is a bookshelf. Very exciting.
Good.
Where are we going to hang out, by the way? Are we in the aerodrome?
My plan was just read chat for 2 hours, so I was hoping that you guys could do some real content.
Yeah, I mean, Sneb, you did the preparation for this. You put the work in, right? You didn't just troll us.
Questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some pretty interesting questions. So to give everybody a little bit of context, I did go on Reddit. I read a whole bunch of people's questions. I looked at Discord. People were DMing me. I've looked at the Twitch chat. I've looked at all of these questions. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to ask all of them, but I tried to sort of consolidate them into a few main areas. One big question that's coming up in a lot of different ways is usually tied to profession identity. So you'll see people asking specifically about like the Antiquary. You'll see people talking about like Evoker and like Water Mage and Dirt Mage and all these different sorts of things. So I'm kind of curious, when you're designing these sorts of elite specs, how do you emphasize that profession identity without totally homogenizing gameplay?
Taylor, you want to say something on the stream?
I think, so there's a lot of, we're getting to the point where there's a lot of elite specs. Like each class has 4 now, and a lot of them have like roles that they kind of like do the same, as people point out. Like we already have an alacrity role, and you're getting an alacrity in this class. I think what we focus on is making sure that the gameplay loop and how the class feels is different. We're more focused on that. Like there are a lot of ways to play DPS, and so really want to make sure that each just like feels different when you play it to the other, and that's kind of like where my head goes when I'm designing something like this. Like when I was making the Gale shot for Ranger, there's already like how Soul Beast plays, there's how Untamed plays, so I'm making sure that it feels different in what it does, even though at the end of the day it's still like a DPS.
Cool.
Okay.
I think it is quite like it's a challenging thing because you know, back in the day, used to have like banner warrants, so like their whole identity in PvE was to drop those banners. And now, what at least I've seen happening is a lot more stuff is tied into traits. So like Luminary, for example, I know it's got that trait where like it reduces strike damage. Are you thinking about how you can make things feel kind of unique through traits?
Yeah, I mean, traits are a pretty good place to define like unique gameplay. Obviously, we tie into a lot of whether it's utility skills or the profession mechanic in the traits, but trying to give like those different play styles. And I know like a big feedback point that we've gotten a lot already just from the preview streams is that some of the specs traits are just not quite interesting enough, and I think that's a pretty fair criticism, and that's something that we're already kind of looking at for ahead toward launch. And even there wasn't a ton of time to get stuff in for the beta between the preview streams and the beta itself. We did get a slight tweak to the Luminary trait line, taking the Alacrity out of the Grandmaster slot and putting it into the Master tier, so that you could play with like the more exciting heal trait with the Sovereign of Lights or the more exciting DPS trait with Master at Arms. But you know, we are still looking ahead toward launch, and traits are one of the like final things that really comes together with the Elite spec. We usually start with like theming and then profession mechanics, and then traits are kind of the thing that has the least like downstream impact. We don't need a ton of art for them. We don't need like a ton of UI for them usually. So they are the easiest things to change and things that we are potentially like. It's easier for us to tweak traits between beta and launch. So we're kind of already looking ahead to that and planning some stuff around those. Because we have gotten like a pretty decent amount of feedback. Obviously, we want people to play with them and see like if you have the same thoughts. But there's been a decent amount of feedback on some of the specs that the trait lines are just not quite as interesting as they could be compared to some of the other ones.
Yeah, that's definitely good to hear.
Speaking of that, first of all, I think I might be a tad loud on your stream, so you might want to turn me down just
on my stream.
Good.
Mute him.
I don't know if it's still a problem.
Mute
Put it to
SNEB.
0. I mean, that's fine.
Put it to 0.
Mute. Yeah, Teapot, go ahead. You had a question.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think kind of on that note, I think like one thing that people are really interested about, and definitely me as well, is like when elite specs are being designed, like how does the considerations of multiple game modes come into play? Like for example, I think Thief and I think Mesmer as well to an extent are examples of professions that sometimes like their class mechanic and the way that they play out in previous elite specializations can be kind of weird. Like in World versus World, like Mesmer clones are a bit wonky, for example. Like Thief sometimes doesn't really have builds that make a lot of sense in World versus World. It's like, what's the consideration with like multiple game modes that kind of goes into these elite specializations?
Yeah, I mean, we consider all of them for sure. I think at first you like put, at least how I was designing it, I'd put together like a profession kit. I'd make like the skills, I think, and then kind of evaluate how I think they'd play out in different game modes. Like if I'm playing like the Amalgam in World v. World, what tools do I have? And then from there, maybe it needs a bit more, put something there. Think about like in PvE, if I'm like fighting a boss, how is the general gameplay flow gonna go? So I think really we try and consider all game modes when we make them. Some abilities are like naturally better in some game modes than others. But I think trying to find the right balance and make sure we don't want a spec that like is just like completely useless in PvE, right? Like it could be like a monster in competitive modes and super fun, but in PvE it just falls flat. And we don't want the opposite as well. We don't want a spec that's really good in PvE, but we can't bring it into competitive mode just from the nature of it. So I think being mindful of all those things as we're designing is something we make sure to do.
Okay. Yeah,
Where
and
is Teapot? Is he doing some gameplay?
yeah, I was fighting a mushroom. I just attacked a mushroom.
You're at the mushroom?
Yeah.
What's your name? Your character name?
I just named them the elite spec. Like I've logged onto my Guardian. I come to Lion's Arch to hang out with you guys. Called Luminary. I'm here. It's time.
Oh, I was gonna come.
Oh, whoa!
Yeah, you're just right over
Okay, you are reported, my friend. What is What is that?
Got some
Okay.
attacks.
Goodness me.
Yeah, I did see a question in chat when I was talking about like trait reworks and asking about like, well, is there still room to do like profession mechanic reworks, even though there's like things that happened earlier and have like more downstream impact? I think that there's definitely still opportunities to adjust profession mechanics and utility skills and traits, all of the things. Like I gave this spiel a lot during the preview streams, but like we're very much expecting that all the elite specs are in a beta state, and there's definitely some that are, being received more positively than others, and that's great. But we kind of had the expectation that none of them are finished, and all of them will be getting adjustments between beta and launch. And, there's no real limit on what can change. It's like, obviously, if we need to go back to the drawing board, if a pressure mechanic doesn't work at all, that is fairly concerning. But there's plenty of room to tweak profession mechanics. And, if something just absolutely doesn't work, then that's something that we need to figure out as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
There's going to be changes for sure. Not limited to traits. It can be skills, profession mechanics, traits, any of the things, all the things. How much we can get done between beta and launch is definitely something that we'll need to figure out as we're getting all the feedback and collecting the data from the beta. But, we'll get the most important things done first, as makes sense. And, we can still change things after the expansion is live, right? There are balance updates that are going to happen in the future.
On that note, speaking of changes, I know, and you've sort of alluded to this, there's a few, and people are going to spam them in the chat probably, but there are specific classes that people have some big concerns about, or they're concerned about balance in a specific game mode, or they think something should be tweaked. When you're looking at these sorts of classes and you're thinking, okay, well, there's sort of an established, right now heal chrono is generally really strong, and heal druid is really strong. When you're looking at introducing, and I'm talking in PvE specifically, when you're thinking about introducing a new elite spec and you're thinking about that role, how do you design things so that they can compete with these other with these other classes without completely stomping on them?
Taylor, you want to take this?
Yeah. Like I said before, when we talk about DBS, honestly, with sometimes support, it's the same, where just how they do it, the gameplay feel, is a big factor in how a lot of people choose which one they play. Specifically about supports, we know that there's a certain toolkit they need that people expect from them, and making sure that those abilities are there, where you want to do some Aegis, some stabilities and kits. This beta will be pretty good for calling out what they don't need. We've done work on support Spectre for a while to make sure it is with the other supports and playability, as we talked about with Chronomancer as well, kind of taking a look at the profession itself and where its support lies and kind of adjusting it, so that both Chronomancer and Troubadour will be pretty good supports, but we want to make sure that there are times where one is the one that shines and others not. Chronomancer has super powerful tools in it, especially with C-Split, and so making sure that that's what shines when you pick Chronomancer, as opposed to just spitting out all the stuff you can, and leaving some of the more generic supporty type deals to the Troubadour, for example.
Yeah, and I think something else that can kind of help with that, and I'm really curious on the perspective on this too, because this is a bit of a shift, I would say, back to the olden days, of course. The thing that I think is also going to help these elite specializations stand out is the return of some unique effects, some unique modifier style abilities, which have kind of previously been removed from the game, broadly speaking, but now, of course, I'm logged onto the Luminary, and that's making its return with this kind of damage reduction effect that it can share out to the team, and even a very special thing where you can kind of absorb damage from your allies as well, and taking it yourself. So what's the thought on that as well? Unique modifiers kind of making their way back into the game.
I think we're pretty comfortable with defensive unique modifiers more so than offensive unique modifiers, because it's more of a flavor of a way for the profession or the elite spec to support their allies, and it doesn't become a mandatory, my raid's trying to maximize damage, so we have to have this specific spec because it gives a specific unique damage bonus.
Yeah.
It's more of just here's a unique way that you can support your allies when you're playing the Luminary, or distortion share. I'd say it's probably unlikely to live too long past the beta, but it's kind of interesting note that the game has been live for so long that every once in a while it is kind of worth reevaluating your assumptions, and the assumption is that distortion share is broken, and it probably is, but it's a beta, so we have this opportunity to bring it back as part of an elite specialization and say, okay, now it's only on an elite skill. We can adjust the cooldown of that. We can adjust the duration of the distortion much more easily. Can it actually work in like this limited context as opposed to the way it used to exist? And the answer is probably still no, but a beta is a great chance to try stuff out.
Yeah, with that in mind, I think a lot of people, when they saw that, they were like, oh boy, that's going to be really powerful, right? And people are very concerned about the balance, whether it's PvP, world versus world, PvE. They want to know what's going to, what might be broken. How can they express that feedback in the most effective way to the dev team?
Just keep it constructive. Like, it's not going to hurt my feelings or hurt our feelings if you say, wow, distortion share is just overpowered. Look at this. Look at all the things that break when I share distortion to my allies. And like, that's totally fine. That's like, again, constructive feedback. Once it like deteriorates into like, oh man, this is the worst thing ever, the game is ruined, we still understand the feedback, and like it's still feedback that we read a lot.
So you're saying we should
feedback.
say that then? You're saying that we should 100% do that?
Say that.
Yeah.
It is not really constructive, but I grew up playing competitive games. I streamed Guild Wars 2 for a long time, and had some rants for sure. And so like we understand that mindset. It's just not constructive is kind of the point. Yeah. So like if you want to have like more of a rapport or a conversation, just keep it reasonable. This is overpowered. Awesome. This is ruining the game. Yeah, it's kind of on the edge. It's not the worst. It's not the worst. We've seen worse.
I've seen worse too.
Personal attacks. Not a fan. It's not really
also
a good
not a
feedback.
Fan. I have a follow-up question very quickly. It's actually from the chat. Somebody was talking about sort of the scope of changes, right? You said that kind of everything's on the table. There's different things that you can change. People are curious about, okay, like if a design of a specific class is like, or elite spec is just not well received, how far are you willing to change something?
I think a good example would be maybe looking at like engineer shortbow. When it came out with the Soto weapons during the beta, there were a lot of opinions around it, and I think we took a lot of them, kind of examined like what it did well and a lot of what it could do better, and changed it that way. I think some things that are unlikely to change are like core thematics. Like if you look at Gale Shot and you're like, wow, I just hate archers. this isn't for me. Where's my Beastmaster spec? It's probably not in scope to completely rework something that way. But that's crashing.
We've disconnected.
Yes, I also.
We'll get back in.
Yeah.
We'll get back in.
But I
Especially
think
I'll try to get it at once.
Yeah, so
as far as mechanics go, like if something like feels clunky and you're like, wow, this just feels awful to use, then we can like go in and dig in and change a lot of things about the skill. So I think, like I said, engineer shortbow, it had the same look and feel to it, but a lot of the way it played was like completely different after we changed it, and I think that's a pretty reasonable of like the length we can go from now to launch.
Yeah, I think another good example, even like an elite spec specific example, was with End of Dragons with the Untamed, where if anyone remembers, like the initial beta, the ambush mechanic was not even in for Untamed. It wasn't something that we had planned to introduce in a future beta or for launch. It was like an idea that we'd been bouncing around internally, and it didn't really feel like we were. Oh boy. It didn't feel like something that we were going to use for the spec, but then we got a lot of feedback that just having the like unleashed ambush skill or the unleashed pet skills was not quite enough of a mechanic to make it an interesting spec. So we went back to the drawing board and like rehashed that that ambush mechanic, and really now that got into the final test for and then for launch, of course.
So yeah, to kind of push that a little bit then. So for example, a luminary having core virtues, that's something that potentially could be looked at, or something else is going on there. Or maybe conduit could have, maybe something could be added to conduit, or something could change there in a way like down the line. But the actual thematics of the spec is will remain the same. So look, if you guys like Scrit, you're in good hands if you're looking at the Antiquary.
Yeah, these are the things that you mentioned are things that we're already kind of thinking about.
Yeah.
Especially like Luminary. We talked about this a little bit on the previous stream, but like the core virtues were actually something that felt kind of like they were doing the right things for the spec. So we want to just like add the Radiant Shroud on top of that and see like, is this an effective elite spec? But we are already kind of thinking about, well, okay, we could make Luminary specific versions of the core virtues where they're like slightly different while still maintaining like the useful things like the AoE heal, the conduit removal, adding that Aegis from Courage, but then maybe it's like Radiant Courage instead of Radiant Resolve, and just has like some extra Luminary flavor on top of that. That's totally possible.
Yeah, okay. Sounds cool. That's for sure. We love to see that.
I've got a bit of a curveball question. Well, it's not that big of a curveball. I'm just kind of curious about the design process in general. I think there's a lot of people, I was reading sort of Reddit comments, Discord comments, etc., where people were saying that they feel like there were some elite specs that maybe there was like a sudden shift in direction, and that's their perception or whatever. But I'm curious about the actual design process. When you sit down and you're like, okay, we got to create some elite specs, what does that look like? Do you pitch a whole bunch of ideas? What happens exactly? How does it go from 0 to elite spec?
You want to take this one, Taylor? I'm
Yeah.
Talking to some people.
I think
Trying
for
to
me,
fix the stream excitement.
started with like concepts of like, for some of mine, I guess going back to Gale Shot specifically, I had always known, I'd heard feedback from like new players, or like, I want to be an archer, which one is the best for me? And it's always like ranger. But then when you get to the end game and you pick your elite spec, it gets kind of like muddy again as to which one's the best. And like, I knew going into this, I want to make like the signpost archer. So thought about mechanics. I came up with like, I knew like I want to like summon a bow somehow, but I didn't know anything behind it, what any of the skills did. I didn't know the theming. And so just kind of going onto that, and we have like little bits of concepts. And then I think this time around we had like the concept of like the Tyrian alliance to tie everything in. And then we were like, okay, where can some of these be from? Some of them we were like, there's a region, and we're like, what makes sense from that region? Where we had like Ritualist and Paragon, and other ones we had like, we knew we had an archer, and like, okay, now which one can we put that in? And so we were like, oh, the Tengu, perfect fit, and then kind of designing around that. So sometimes it's like you start with an idea, a concept, and then mechanics like fall under that. But other times maybe you have like mechanics that you want to do and then build up. Like for the amalgam, I kind of had this idea of, I wanted to take, I really like the utility skill system in Guild Wars. I think it's amazing. And I was like, what if we just did it even more, like push it further? And so did that for engineer. And then we're like, what is the narrative wrapper that can fit around this?
The slime.
So yeah, the mercurial
really
mold.
cool.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like different for each spec, like where it starts from. Like some of them we do, like we want to bring ritualists. So it's like, how do we do that?
Yeah, and potentially I imagine there are other considerations as well. I feel like Paragon almost represents kind of the other end of that. For example, like many players have kind of wanted to have like a shout heal warrior, right, for a long time. It's always been a concept that's been floating around a little bit, obviously, and has even found good success, particularly in competitive modes. But Paragon is very much here to kind of provide that core for a support build that can function within the PvE environment as well, right? So yeah, is that something that's also thought about a fair bit as well? Like, so not only the thematic gaps that might exist within a profession, but also potentially kind of like the functional gaps, if that makes any sense, like within how people approach the game and the metagame and so on.
Yeah, that's completely right. When we were doing Paragon, we definitely wanted support warrior. There's not a ton of gaps like that left in the game now that we have like so many weapons and elite specs, but it was like a glaring hole, and so we're like, we need to do a support warrior spec. And there were different ideas how to do it, and eventually we landed on the Paragon.
Cool.
Or we should be back. I
Oh,
was
we-
able to log in.
There are some really, like, hats off to the chat. There's some really constructive, really good questions. I'm going to try to kind of combine two questions that I've seen. There's sort of this general sentiment that some of these elite specs are like so well designed, which should be like a really positive thing, that you kind of look back at some of the old ones and you're like, man, that might need a bit of a tweak, right? You know, I'm seeing questions where people are saying, you know, Antiquary seems like it'd be kind of cool at range, but Rifle is like really dependent on Malice from Deadeye. And then I hear people saying, oh man, Gale Shot is like so cool and how the longbow thing was implemented, but you know, Bladesworn has like a similar thing, but it can't weapon swap. When you think about sort of the direction of this design, how on the table is it to sort of go back and revisit some of these old elite specs to give them like a little boost to the same level where these new elite specs are?
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. Looking out about like the last balance patch, there were a lot of reworks completely to things, and I think that's something we're looking for, like, to do a lot more in the future. So things you talk about how Rifle is only good on Deadeye, so maybe making it so that other things can play it, looking at the issues there, tweaking some things. A lot of elite specs, maybe their core mechanics don't translate the best into how the game plays today, and giving them a bit of like a coat of fresh paint is always something we're looking forward to doing. So I think depending on like resources and timeline, it can change which ones we go for, but I think everything to be changed is on the table.
Cool.
Yeah, I've sort of been a bit more focused on like trait reworks or individual skill reworks, just due to the amount of time that we've had for balance updates, with, you know, a lot of time being spent on elite spec development. So we'll kind of see how things are once elite specs are, well, we still have a bunch of iteration to do after the beta goes live and we get all the feedback for that. But, you know, looking ahead to the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, maybe there'll be more time to spend on balance updates.
Yeah, I think like here's a good one actually. So have there ever been times when things have like surprised you? Like, say, I think just kind of in general actually, like with elite specializations or maybe, you know, potential reworks and kind of class changes, skill changes and so on. Have there been things that were not, I guess, as I suppose, intended? Because obviously, when you're putting these specs together, you'll have some idea of, oh, what is the gameplay loop going to look like for this? Like, oh, you know, how is this going to play out, right? What about this in PvP, in world versus world? Like, how? I guess what I'm asking you here is, how good are you at predicting how this goes down? Have there ever been moments where players have really kind of come up with some crazy stuff out of nowhere?
Man, was this on our pre-planned question list? Because I would have went and thought of like a good example ahead of time to talk about this, but I don't. Now I have to think about
was
it.
not-
Do you have anything off the top of your head? I would say, I mean, almost certainly yes. I would have to think about it a bit more to give you a specific example, but this is just kind of the reality of game design, is that, you know, we spend a bunch of time internally designing specs, thinking about specs, working on the gameplay, playing the gameplay the way we think, or trying to play the gameplay in a way that we're not initially thinking of. You know, we have a bunch of people internally that test them as well. And then, you know, the first day of the beta, we're going to have like 100 times more data immediately than all of the internal testing time. And that's just an arbitrary number. It's probably like, who knows what the actual number is, but just the number of hours that players will spend playing the specs is going to completely dwarf the time that is spent playing them internally. So it would be more of a surprise if nothing unexpected was found. If there was no surprises, that would be the biggest surprise.
Yeah. And I guess kind of on that kind of same topic, and maybe veering back on course a little bit, like... Obviously, you've been looking at the feedback, right? We've seen these previews for everything. Do you think there's anything that everyone's sleeping on right now? Do people everyone not recognizing the true power of any of these elite specializations so far?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of like good reads on the power level of some of them, and like some like I know a lot of people are like Ritualist looks pretty spooky, and I agree, it's very spooky. And we're very interested to see how spooky. But I think also like a lot of the feedback on Luminary, I think specifically around the core virtues, a lot of people weren't too excited to have them back. But I think Cal and I, we've played competitive a lot, and their core guard, it's like real, and like the core virtues are good. And so seeing some of the synergies in the trait line, like we see power behind them that maybe some other people don't agree with or don't also see. So I think seeing where that actually shakes out and lands will be pretty interesting. That's just off the top of my head the first thing that when we got feedback, I was like, I don't think, when I see like cooldown resets on core virtues, especially with something as strong as like Virtue of Courage in some game modes, like that has a lot of power behind it. So we'll see.
Yeah, I see Luminary as an easy example just because it is kind of one of the specs that's kind of like had like a lot of trepidation around with the community feedback so far, I think. So I'm not saying that it's like perfect, but relative to the current like prediction and the reality, it feels like it's a bit underrated. I think the Shroud gameplay also is something that feels a lot better to play with, more so than to see or even just watch someone show off. And that's, again, not trying to say that anything's perfect here, and we've already kind of talked about how we're thinking about some ideas for like the radiant virtues as a kind of a replacement of the core virtues while also maintaining the same like core functionality. But I think it's really fun to play. It's like one of the ones that I've been playing a lot internally, and I think especially the light aura trait is really fun. I mean, both of the grandmaster traits, the bottom two grandmaster traits, are really interesting like gameplay shifts, like the resets on the shroud weapons or like the light aura synergy, the king of lights, sovereign of lights, are pretty fun to play with. So I think once people get their hands on it, they might be a little bit higher on like those aspects of the spec, and then maybe we need to still reevaluate some of the traits that are less exciting, and maybe the virtues need a bit of a tune-up as well. But I think it has a lot of potential relative to kind of the initial response, initial reception.
Yeah, and that's always something that we need to fully get our hands on, right, and like log into the game and see what on earth is going on there, to truly figure out what's going on and mess around and figure out all the possibilities and so on. For these elite specializations, because of course there's a lot of combinations, right? Like it's going to be all the different traits you can pick, but also the interactions with the other trait lines and existing utilities and weapons and so on that also have to be kind of figured out and explored. So there's a lot going on there as well. Do you have a question, SNEB? I think you've got a couple that you wanted to bring up.
I've been kind of scanning the chat here. There's a whole bunch of really good questions, and I like the whole time I'm thinking, man, I can't ask all of them. There's just not enough time. Let me go to this one. I think there will be a lot of people who are interested in this, and I've seen this come up quite a few times, just on social media and stuff. When I look at some of these new elite specs, I think some of them are perhaps a little bit more simple when it comes to gameplay and maybe APM, right? Actions per minute. Are you really, really fast with it, or is it a little bit more relaxed, right? And there's some diversity within the game across all elite specs and classes with that regard. But when I look at some of the new ones, I think, ooh, some of these are pretty fast. When you're thinking about designing these elite specs, how do you balance kind of the fast-paced, high APM gameplay with more accessible, lower APM styles, so that when somebody sees, I'm just going to say a random one, like Amalgam, because that's what I'm on right now, they go, I want to be able to play this, but maybe I'm not a super high APM player. How can you make it exciting for both kinds of players?
I think Taylor has higher APM than me, so he can take this one.
I think it's about options. A lot of the ones, like, I think keeping things simple is good, and focusing a lot around the gameplay about, like, emergent gameplay. Like, you don't need all abilities to do, like, a ton of things. Like, the 2 skill on a Gale Shot is just, like, it shoots 3 arrows. It's not exactly complicated, but I think in the situations you'll find yourself in, and everywhere, that's what kind of makes it more interesting. So I think things being simple is good, and I think having options around different types of gameplay, like when you look at Deadeye, there is like builds where you can have very low APM and builds where you have super high APM, and it's about letting players pick. We don't want there to be a class that's like the only way you can play it is super high. I think if you look back around like Untamed Launch, Fervent Force was a trait that had like super high APM, was super strong, but it was like the only way to play Untamed, and we we had an issue with that. We wanted to make sure it was a lot more accessible. We don't have problems with high APM builds. We like them. We want to make sure that it's not the only way to play it, and that, accessibility, like you're saying, is something we definitely keep in mind. And we'll be looking at when we do these specs. As we have been talking about, we create these skills and we have a general idea of how they're going to play, and then it gets in the game, and then we don't fully know until you're there. So watching what is the most optimal Gale Shot build, what is the most optimal Conduit build, is something we are very interested in seeing what people create, and making changes based off that.
Cool. We love to see that. Got anything else, SNEB? You got anything else?
Yeah, I've got another one. There's kind of a theme of some questions that have been coming up, so hopefully this appropriately combines them. But there's some people that are saying, hey, I might feel that, again, kind of random, but Ritualist is maybe kind of close to core Necro or plays very similar to something that already exists. I think there's some question about how do you really distinguish these and make them feel like they're truly unique and it's just not another power DPS build on Necro.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the theming and kind of the exact way that the skills come together, because obviously if you're playing an elite spec versus a core spec or an elite spec versus a different elite spec, the skills are all going to be slightly different, and you might have the same weapons, or you might have some overlapping generic deal damage utility skill or generic damage bonus utility type stance. But the skill rotations and the general gameplay of the spec hopefully feels different enough that it feels okay, well, maybe this spec's a little bit more bursty moments. This one's going to be much more of a sustained DPS. So there are slightly different flavors of, there's a lot of elite specs that do, whether it's power damage or condi damage, just DPS elite specs, and they all generally feel pretty differently. There is some overlap, especially when there is a lot of the same weapons being used, but they still all have their own little flavors, whether it's coming from their traits or their progression mechanic or their utility skills.
I feel the point as well when they were Ritualist feels a lot like core Necro, that's not entirely unintentional. Core professions and a lot of their gameplay is something that people really like. Obviously, when you game first came out, that's what you did, is play the core profession, and then as elite specs have come and been made, a lot of it has been not lost, but maybe not highlighted as well as it could have been. And so I think when we were designing Ritualist, we were we want kind of a more core Necro feeling shroud that's ranged replaces your health, something that you're used to. When you get the Luminary, you have the core virtues you're used to. And so both kind of class fantasies that the core profession provided that maybe isn't highlighted upon by some of the new elite specs, as well as the gameplay, was something that when we looked at these professions, can we bring that back into an elite spec world?
Very cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah, I think that solves it for quite a bit of people. There's a few other questions. This is kind of related, I guess. People are curious about how not adding weapons or attaching weapons to elite specs has now shifted the design space and maybe given you more freedom, or how does that affect the design space and not having to have that weapon attached?
Taylor, are you interested in taking this one?
I guess I can talk about it because, for me personally, I never felt restricted by not having a weapon. I just felt it put it more highlight on the actual profession mechanics that it's coming with. Some of maybe the older elite specs, like Scrapper, a lot of its identity was in the hammer. In that it's, if you look at the profession skills, there's not too much different from a core engineer there. And I feel here, it just we knew that we had to put all the flavor and impact in the gameplay into its profession mechanic, and also keep mind of all the weapons that come along with it. So I feel even the Gale Shot specifically, even if we could make a new weapon for it, I felt the profession mechanic did what I needed it to do to sell the spec. So personally, I didn't feel hindered at all when making these without the weapon. And I feel they, they shine on their own. They don't need that additional gameplay hook with it.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of important to make sure that in the absence of weapon, all the profession mechanics do feel, that they evoke the the correct identity or the right correct feeling for what the spec is trying to do, because there is no weapon to like fall back on. You really only have the progression mechanic and the utility skills and the traits, of course, which, you know, there's a lot of crazy traits in some of these elite specs that really are specialization defining or gameplay playstyle defining. So, you know, we have to lean a little bit more heavily on those things just to make sure that this really does feel like a new gameplay experience. And, you know, that's just important because the weapons are all unlinked at this point as well.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up, actually, of course, because, you know, with Secrets of the Obscure, with weapon mastery, right, elite specs really need to stand on their own because they're going to be combining with all of them anyway, right, because of that feature in that expansion. So I bet, you know, it's got to have a lot going on. Or it's over. I think that's kind of all of the... I think all of the main questions we had, if I'm not mistaken, SNEB, actually. So I think, are we going to the next phase in the plan? Which we definitely have. Wait, where's he going? He's actually running away. That's unbelievable.
The dog is going crazy. Somebody rang the doorbell and
Dog's
he went
hyped.
ballistic. So I was like, you guys don't want to hear that.
Yeah. But
yeah, we're kind of going to the community part where we're just fielding as many questions as possible. I've seen another couple of themes. This one has come up a whole bunch of times. I don't know if it's a meme or not, but whatever, I'll ask it. They're asking about sort of what the plan is for underwater integration with some of this stuff. Because, of course, something like Mechanist, traditionally, you know, they had it. The elite spec has a totally different identity underwater. And so people are concerned about, like, what'll that look like for Antiquary? What's that going to look like for Ritualist? What is that going to look like for all of the elite specs? Is there like a big plan for that right now, or is that kind of still cooking?
So most of we've done our pass on all the things and tried to make them work underwater as much as makes sense. You know, a lot of things like ground targets will have to change to be like enemy targeted. I'm running over to the water right now to show off that Ritualist spirits do actually work underwater. On gw2, if I can spawn the right. Oh, that's actually interesting. So like all the spirits work underwater, for example, and you know this is kind of true for a lot of the progression mechanics and utility skills. We do sometimes have to pick and choose that some things have to get disabled because they just don't work fundamentally or mechanically underwater, but for the most part we do our best to try to make sure that all of the skills and all the progression mechanics will work underwater.
Yeah, it's good to know, because, you know, I think, you know, underwater combat, although it's not like a, you know, it's not the most dominant thing in the universe. Of course, where we're going in Visions of Eternity, we're going to be a bit of a tropical vacation. There might be some swimming going on there, you know? Maybe the crab is going to be battled underwater. We don't know. And actually, I just have to quickly note something. I have to quickly, yeah, you've got to get those swimsuits, guys. You really do. I want to quickly point out something. I have done something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. I have avenged Roy and defeated the Guardian NPC in single combat in the PvP lobby. And on Luminary as well. Okay, so that is important stuff. Just wanted to quickly point that out for everyone.
Oh, might be OP, you need to nerf it.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of very profession-specific questions. Unfortunately, I feel like we're not going to be able to answer. I feel like those are probably still cooking quite a bit. So, like, people are asking about Amalgam. They're asking about Evoker. They're asking about all these, like, specific things. What's the best way that they can, you know, maybe express their concerns? How can they get you the data you need? I kind of asked that before, but let's reiterate that again.
I think if you have feedback that you want us to read, the best place to put it will be the forums. It'll be like we did with the weapons, or it will be like a master thread that has all the links. So like if you have like Elementalist feedback, then there will be a thread. We read every comment in those. If you want me to read something, put it there. I promise you, I will read it. There are also other like third-party social medias. Like Reddit, I know a lot of people like to put things there. I'll most likely read it there too. But I would say like official, like the forum, if you want to get read, there's very, very high likelihood to put it there. So yeah, that'd be the number one place. Specifically in the threads that we make. Like if you want to make your own thread, that's cool. But like if the ones that we make, we do monitor those.
Yeah, and perhaps kind of on this element now, because obviously, again, like very specific questions may not be easy to answer right now, because again, things are obviously in flux. Can we give people in the chat some guidance, perhaps, on like what type of question would be good that we could actually engage with in the time that we have here today? Is there? I know that's a difficult question, I suppose, like on the fly, but can we guide people what they can ask us?
I don't know if there's a good guidance. Like, obviously, if you have questions about or concerns, like discussion topics of like specific elite specs, we could just try to talk about them if we want to. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
some of the time the answer will be like, we're just waiting to see what happens with the beta. Like there are, like I've already said a few times on this stream, where there are things that we've seen from the initial reception that are things that we're already thinking about, so we could talk about some of those as well. Or if someone
would you be
asks a
willing
question,
to maybe say what a few of those things are? Because I think people are asking those, but obviously I don't want to constantly bring them up if they're like a sore spot or anything. But is there any feedback you've seen already where you're like, yeah, we're definitely going to go and address that?
I think a minor one is like when we showed Troubadour and Alacrity, it was a conversation of like, should it be Alacrity or Quickness? And I think, you know, that's something definitely keeping an eye on. I've seen a lot of good points about why it should be one, why it should be other. You know, biggest one to me is that the interaction between the new Boon extension and Time Warp gives a lot of quickness, so being able to do both is potentially problematic, which we'll see in the beta, but I think, you know, a lot of the feedback that people have been saying are things that we're like, yeah, we're definitely thinking about waiting for the beta to see like concrete, you know, like player feedback around it. But we are still like, even now thinking about things we can change. Cal talked about changing the Luminary. It's something we were managed to get in early. Yeah, there's after all of them, we do read, people are like, what's the point of getting feedback now before the beta? But even the things that people are saying just from the previews are things, getting ideas floating in our mind. And the earlier time we have to prepare for them and do them, you know.
Awesome. So it's good, like as a, you know, a big fan of the game and as a player, it's good to know that you folks see all that feedback and that you're considering those changes and thinking about what you can do.
yeah, because I mean, I'll say this over and over and over and over and over and over, but it's a beta, and even if it wasn't a beta, like things are not going to be perfect on launch, especially like skills and balance, combat design. Like the Guild Wars 2 combat system is fantastic, but it's also like really complicated, and like there's a lot of things. We even see this like as balance updates happen, that there is a period of time where even the players that are playing the game so much, like it still takes time to figure everything out, because there's like so many things to try, there's so many things to optimize, that you have to find the right build, then you have to optimize your gameplay around that build, and it's like, oh well now this is overpowered because we figured it all out. And it's like that's really interesting. Like that's the most fun part of like a game like Guild Wars 2, or just, you know, most games, is figuring out the overpowered things. But there is just a lot of complexity, so we don't really have the expectation that things are going to be perfect for beta or even at launch. But there's going to be more data, more information, and we can continue to iterate and, you know, continue to make these elite specs and just the game in general like the best version.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy your 80k DPS while it lasts. That's what I'm getting from that, okay? It's gonna drop. It's gonna be busted. Okay, get it done. Look, you've been working on that Aura Legendary Challenge mode. Look, okay, these elite specs have got you covered. Well, I'm playing Fire Wizard right now. Finally. Okay, it took long enough.
I'm watching.
Yeah. As you can see, the champion Arrowhead is no match for the power of the Fire Wizard.
I assume you're playing the specialized elements trait, right?
Oh, of course. Of
I just
course.
realized I was muted.
Oh, this
Okay.
guy!
I have something really important to say. Really important.
Okay. Oh, yeah?
Okay. So important.
Yeah.
People, all of you are going to be able to try this. I think it's like next week on Wednesday. So if you're like really curious about Evoker, or you're really interested in Amalgam, and you're thinking, I got to get my feedback to the devs, this is your chance. Next week, you get to play, right? Isn't it the 20th? I have that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah, I believe it's the 20th, and it should be live for about a week, beta. So a lot of time to play with all the specs, you know, play as many as you want, give feedback on as many as you want.
Put a smiley face in the chat if you're gonna try out Fire Wizard Evoker. I think that's gonna be a popular one. It's gonna be a really popular one.
Definitely an interesting one.
Very exciting.
Smiley face.
Yeah, there's a lot of smiley faces.
There's a lot. I
think
mean,
people
that's
are really
a
excited
lot
about
of
this.
smiley faces. I think we have to go do battle with
Imagine
the
if all those smiley people were in one room.
SNEB. We must do battle with the frog. Come to the frog. You know which frog as well.
Wait, which frog?
Are you kidding
that
me?
Frog.
How can you not know which frog? We
Wait,
gotta
you're
wait.
talking about the one
I almost want to make Trig
over
1v1
here,
it.
right?
I want to see Trig 1v1 the frog on Amalgam.
What am
Like
I
that's
wanting?
the
Yeah,
frog.
Okay, yes.
Oh my
I want
God.
to see it too. Trig
Yeah.
has to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. While I'm setting this up, I guess I'll make Cal talk while I'm doing this. You want to talk about
he's
like
gonna
kind
put on a
of?
build.
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. He's doing a little
Okay,
cooking.
I need a swap for an Amalgam. I need a swap for an Amalgam.
Yeah. He's doing a little cook.
What's some of the feedback that we're looking for during the beta, and like types of what do we want people to comment on specifically? Maybe like the gameplay feel or how is best to give feedback that's actionable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the more specific, the better. Like, if your feedback is, "Oh, this spec feels a little clunky to me," like that's still valid feedback. And like, if we get that same feedback a lot, then there's almost certainly something to look into. But it's more useful if you have like specific skills or specific sequences that. In this example, it's like, what actually is the clunky feeling of the spec? Is it because, I wanted to press these 3 utility skills in a row, and then the aftercast was like really bad, like really unintuitive the way that I like use my profession mechanic skills, or bouncing between like weapon skills and profession mechanic skills. Just like the general gameplay loops. If there's things that feel clunky, it's like where in the gameplay loop is the clunky feeling? Is kind of the more interesting component. And obviously you can just say, this is clunky, and that's, again, valid, and we'll look into it and try to figure it out. But if you're getting that feeling, hopefully there's a specific reason why you're getting that feeling, and that's not always the case either. It's not like you can always give specific feedback of this skill is the problem, or like this trait is really uninteresting. It doesn't give me interesting gameplay decisions at all. It's very useful if you can provide a specific example, but even just those general feelings are pretty valuable to us, because we will, aggregate all the feedback and see, okay, well, a lot of people are saying this spec feels really clunky to play. Let's go figure out why and make that better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something that players, I think, are really good at, is indeed identifying what's wrong, like identifying problems, right, is going to be really important, so that they can obviously be addressed, and the elite specs can, can shine. Wow, it's not looking good for this Amalgam. This Amalgam just got deleted by the frog within seconds, actually. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Like, everyone should log on to the beta, play every spec, every bit of content, and then give feedback on the forums. I've read a bunch of forum threads recently, and honestly, there's some pretty interesting stuff in there. That's for sure. Let's see.
I have a question that's come from the chat. A few people have asked this, but in different ways. They're sort of concerned about the location of specific traits, and is there still opportunity to move things around? What are your thoughts on that? I feel like before you kind of mentioned that everything's still, you're open to feedback, you're willing to make the changes if they need to, correct?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, we kind of already ahead of the beta shuffled some stuff around in the Luminary trait line, so that's very, very possible to do for other specs as well. I think like traits are something that I kind of said this earlier, but traits are kind of a instance where we've seen a lot of initial feedback around like, well, this trait is boring, and there's a lot of quote unquote boring or uninteresting traits in this trait line. So obviously we want to make sure that the Grandmaster traits are the ones that feel like the most iconic and the most build defining. But we still want the rest of the trait line to have interesting decisions. So if there are situations where there's not really enough interesting decisions, then that's something that we'll be looking at. I think a good example of this that we've kind of been thinking about after the initial preview feedback as well is kind of with the Evoker trait line, where it's trying to do a lot of stuff in the same trait line. So there's a lot of like very specific traits, like all the different elemental traits. It was like a pretty interesting idea where it's like, here's a trait that gets better when you're specialized in that element. But I think, we're going to see how the beta feedback plays as people get their hands on it, because we've been playing with them internally as well. And it's like kind of interesting, but maybe it makes the trait line try to do too many specific things, and so it kind of just fails all of the builds. Instead of making 4 interesting builds, we made 0. And like obviously our goal is to make at least 4 interesting builds with the different elements that you can choose from. So it may be the case that some of those things, they're intended to be like a bit more element defining. Like the toad gets the protection when you disable someone, to try to really be like that tanky bruiser play style. Maybe these are some things that need to be rolled in baseline for the familiars. It's like when I specialize in Earth, I just have like, it would obviously be a lot weaker if it is not tied to any trait or trade-off. But you could get like a small amount of protection anytime you disable someone when you have the toad equipped, and like then that would give you more room in the trait line to really flesh out some more general things, as opposed to being like as specific as it is right now. So that's just again that's just something that we're kind of thinking about. It's not like a guarantee that these things will change. It's just, we have a bit of time right now where we've mostly been just like bug fixing, getting ready for the beta, and not a whole lot of new development happening for Elite Specs. So we are already just looking ahead and thinking about possibilities, not saying that anything specific will happen, but these are the things that we think about every day.
Yeah, cool. I think that's some really good insight there as well, actually, because I think, it is really important that, well, I think it's really cool that like loads of new ideas are being brought to the table, but yeah, of course, like those are going to be refined and improved at the time to make sure that they kind of like fit into the game as well.
I'll actually bring up one specific thing that I noticed, and I think I've had a lot of people asking about this specifically. There are some traits that are just very simply like, do the boon, right? And Paragon is a really good example of this, where it just is like alacrity. And when you look at that, it seems like really boring relative to the other traits, where it's like, do this, do more healing. When you're designing those traits and thinking about that, how do you balance like making the game balanced and being able to provide some excitement while also providing boons?
Taylor, you want? I see you just standing here, not actually fighting anything. So clearly you have bandwidth.
We succeeded. We're just that good. I think, that was one of the feedback points we're definitely going to look at. And after the beta, seeing how it plays, going to iterate on it. I think a lot of the time you guys are right that like just applying the boon maybe isn't the most interesting, especially when we do Grandmaster traits, thinking about the way that it can change gameplay. Sometimes a lot of the difference between a DPS and a boon DPS is like, I took the trait and now I'm going to apply the boon, which sometimes is okay, and other times it's an opportunity to change the gameplay, the game feel, and so seeing if we can add more to that trait to make it more interesting is definitely something we'll look at after the beta. I think when a boon application trait is in a Grandmaster slot, having a way to apply the boon but then also change the gameplay a bit. I think like when you look at Gale Shot, how the quickness, it applies quickness but also gives you just some subtle differences in how you play the build, is kind of the direction to go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that we've been really impressed by overall, actually, is that, in particular, again, kind of go back to the Grandmasters, right? The Grandmaster traits are, like, very, very impactful as well. And I think also, like, Antiquary is another one where all of the traits are really, really exciting. I think pretty much every trait on the Antiquary, like, significantly changes, like, how the class works in some way or another, like, mechanically. So I think that stuff is incredibly cool, actually. We love to see that. Or at least I love to see that as well. But yeah, you go ahead, SNEB.
What was I even gonna say? I was just gonna ask, like, which class are you most excited about? Which profession you're like, yeah, day one, that's what I'm gonna play, right?
You really asking to pick favorites? This is gonna get clipped. This is gonna get clipped. Oh dear.
I think
I don't have a favorite. Sorry, guys. No sound
really
bite.
good answer.
Look, I'm just fielding the chat's questions. They all wanted to know what the favorite was, so. You can have no favorite. That's okay. Look, I'm just saying mine is Amalgam. I think Amalgam's really cool. I like the idea of like the people keeps asking me if it's mold though, and I don't get what they're talking about.
Slime mold.
So, yeah, I don't get. What
And the people want to know.
I looked it up.
Is it fungus? Is it fungus or not? Tell us the lore. We need to know the lore. That's what people want to know.
I googled, and a slime mold is not a fungus. So
it's not a fungus. Because I think there was a Reddit post about that actually. I feel like people need to know this.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like what is it then? Like,
I looked it up. It's chemistry.
It's just some chemistry stuff. You know? Who knows?
yeah. Lore master.
Do you have any big questions, Teapot? Do you have any other big questions? Chat, ask more questions. Do you have any other big questions? I'll try to field as many as I can.
I think the chat does need to ask
We
more
still have
questions.
like another hour scheduled for this, right?
Oh wow.
So much time.
Yeah,
I don't know how much time is scheduled for this.
we have unlimited
I
time.
thought it was like.
We're just
Yeah,
here
we can
forever.
just
And I have some
24
meetings in the
hour stream,
afternoon,
let's go.
so I will have to leave at some point.
You could just yap about this all day. I'm just chilling.
Okay. I'm using the script bomb. It's time. Okay, never mind. I blew myself up. It's over.
There's so many questions.
Oh yeah, I think this is a good one actually as well. This is one that's good to bring up. So one thing that's kind of interesting about the new elite specializations is that many of them are kind of coming with UI stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like, is that going to be evolving? How much is that going to be evolving, like over time? And also, is that something that would also potentially be implemented to other elite specializations as well at some point?
I think feedback on the UI is definitely a pretty good point to have. Just talking about it, if you feel like it's hard to see the conduit pips, for example, that's stuff we can action. I think as for like, you know, going back and doing others, the answer is that like we always want to, but it's just finding the time and resources to devote to the things. Like, I know like Firebrand pages would love to get, you know, how we have the Gale Shot Arrow meteor that you can see. Would love to have that for Firebrand eventually, but, you know, putting a timeline on those things is not something we're going to do. So.
Okay. The script bomb does quite a lot of damage to yourself. That is extremely funny.
It does.
It is the true last resort.
You have to have someone else give you barrier and stab, and then just use it, and it's like an instant speed.
That is huge damage. Yeah, that's true.
Pretty good. But it is intended to be a bit of a downside. It's supposed to be a little bit unlucky to get that, so you know. It's
Yeah,
not
you don't want to actively go for it.
you don't just get an instant CC that does a bunch of damage.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Hello, what could possibly be wrong with
This
that?
is a good question. This is actually a very good question. It seems kind of random because it's not a mechanic question, but it's like, do the animals have names for Evoker? And I think I mean there's just the skill names, right? Like there's fox, there's otter, there's hare, but I don't think there's any like.
But they're like spirits.
specific
They're like spirits of
name.
the wild, right? So I guess that kind of is their name in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the lore. Unlike you, SNEB, I read the lore. Not my fault you don't know the
Whoa.
lore.
I don't know how to read. What are you talking about?
That's interesting.
I just press all the buttons, Steve. I don't read anything. I just go in.
Yeah. Well, that definitely explains why you don't have embodiment of sin. That's for sure.
That's yeah. Look, we could get it tomorrow if everyone plays tomorrow. That's true. Could happen. They only failed because I wasn't there. Just remember that.
Sounds right.
Where are your other questions, chat?
Oh, this is actually an interesting.
Okay.
You know, is there any apparently? Okay, I don't actually even know if this is true. There's kind of asserting that no boon strip skills got added to the new specs. I haven't checked every skill to validate if that's true. But is there a reason that maybe there aren't boon strip skills? If that's true.
You can remove boons from yourself.
Go ahead.
Okay, that's what you can do. Okay, self boon removal
True.
with the Antiquary utility. We got that going for us.
Yeah, Boon Rip is
True, actually.
generally something it usually has like a pretty strong theme behind it. Like Spellbreaker's a great example. We gave Boon Rip to Warrior because Spellbreaker's entire shtick is like destroying your magic. Having just like a random skill here or there remove boons it's definitely possible, but I think that like, most of the Boon Rips in the game right now are pretty like on theme for it to do that. And I don't know if we had a bunch of instances with these elite specs where that theme would make sense. I think there's always room for like Revenant to do that, of course, and even like the Antiquary maybe has some of the artifacts that could make a little bit of sense, but I don't think there were a ton of like strong anti-boon themes on these specs. So that's kind of the reason why there's nothing there initially. But that's not to say that we can't add them if we feel like that is a thing that, that's a very unique gameplay element that could be added to a spec if it is something that really fits and really develops the identity of that spec. But initially, it didn't seem like there were a lot of great fits for those, which is the initial thought.
I know there is one on the Troubadour, the Scarlet Briar Tail, the offensive targeted one that does strip some boons, but that's because it's in Mesmer's like wheelhouse to remove boons, and like we were talking about something Rev could maybe do. There isn't any on like Ranger, for example, because boon ripping isn't really a Ranger thing. It's something special to Untamed, but wanted to keep that again to Untamed. Wouldn't really make sense to put that in a lot of places on the Gale Shot, for example.
Yeah, and of course there is still the core kit, right? There are going to be things that you'll be able to combine with these elite specializations that will potentially have that that ability as well.
There are a ton of questions about specific elite specs, so I just want to remind everyone that you'll get to try this out next week for yourself. So if you're curious about like how it'll feel or how it will play in PvE or PvP or whatever you want to do, give it a shot next week. And then if you like love it, say that. If you're like, I feel like there could be a few changes, make sure you give that feedback, because the devs need the feedback during the beta so they can constantly iterate and improve.
And if there's questions about like, oh, I see a bug. The hair did not shrink back. That's good. If there are like questions about how things work or like certain clarifications, like the underwater question where we just kind of said, these things will hopefully work in most cases. There's questions like that about elite specs. We can totally answer those. Obviously, you can play them next week, but if you want, that's going to like unlock your theory craft for the weekend because you now understand how this works for the spec. Then we can totally answer stuff like that.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions about like the general vision for certain classes. And I think some people are like, oh yeah, Paragon, obviously you said before, it's kind of like a gap for heal warrior, so you want to make that heal warrior. But then they think, well, what if I don't want to be a heal Paragon? Like, is there going to be a route where I can actually go and do some other role? How do you envision the roles for all these different elite specs? Do you go in thinking, yeah, they're going to fill this specific gap, or do you try to make it so that they're kind of playable, doing a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I think it's important that, we usually go in with some general idea of what roles that the spec is going to fill. Paragon obviously intended to be a support warrior, but there is already some like groundwork being laid for the more aggressive like DPS Paragon with like the Grandmaster trait that, we've seen some feedback that's not the most interesting way to give a damage bonus, so maybe you want to like retool that a little bit. But there is like the more selfish Grandmaster trait that is supposed to be leaning into that more aggressive, damaging, spear mastery Paragon. I didn't play a ton of like DPS Paragon in Guild Wars 1, so I'm probably going to say something that doesn't make any sense. But you could definitely play the spear chucking DPS, quote unquote DPS Paragon in Guild Wars 1. So as we're like translating into Guild Wars 2, we want to make sure that that is a supported playstyle. It's just the main focus was definitely on getting the support build to work, and we do want to have like that DPS build be as an option, and maybe it's not quite there yet, or maybe it needs like a more of a like shift to how the GM trait works to enable that build, but it is something that we're definitely thinking about.
Cool. You know, this is a slightly broad question, so this might be out of scope, but I will ask anyway. We might as well try. What's the is there like a vision for elite skills going into this? Because I think something that's notable about these elite specializations actually is that we've seen some really kind of out there elite skills. Of course, the distortion share on the Troubadour, but also the Paragon that I'm logged into right now with We Will Never Yield. An incredibly powerful effect that, you know, shares a unique modifier that, well, I'm going to try and test, actually. I'm going to go see if I can die to the frog real quick. See if we can get this effect going. Preventing you from dying entirely for a bit of a duration, though.
Yeah, I mean, elite spec, or elite skills, rather. It's just another case where, like, Grandmaster traits are kind of supposed to be, like, the gameplay defining traits for the most part. Elite skills are definitely supposed to be that, like, moment of power, or, like, that iconic moment for the spec. And it's another location in the absence of a weapon that we can really, like, have this really awesome skill that, you know, I play Paragon because I want We Will Never Yield, or I play Evoker because I want elemental procession where I summon all of the familiars, and it's kind of ridiculous, but it's a lot of fun. And so we do want to make, like, elite skills, those, for the most part, those big gameplay moments. And I mean, if you look at all the elite skills across the game, there are some that are a bit more like utility centric, where they are, you know, a little bit lower cooldown and they just do something like pretty valuable, but more often than you might get from like a utility slot skill, or like, you know, a slightly higher power level than you might get from a utility slot skill. But there are also a lot of elite skills that are like those big flashy moments for sure.
Cool.
All right, I've got a question that like has been asked over and over and over again. I don't even know if this is one that you can answer, so you can decline to answer. But they're asking about like weapon swaps on NG and Elementalists, and if that's essentially on the table.
I mean, we'll never say anything's off the table, but it is pretty far on the edge of the table. Is what I would say.
Yeah.
It's hanging on for, you know, the script hanging off of the Cryptus turret is kind of what's happening. With,
Yeah.
With that question, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like that'd be pretty difficult to implement in a balanced way.
Yeah. No argument here.
Don't push your luck. You've already got Fire Wizard, right? Like, that should keep him quiet, okay? At least for a good amount of time.
The people have definitely been asking about weapon swap for the specialized elements traits specifically. We thought about it. I'll say that we thought about it. It's kind of spooky, even like with a single element, just because I think like a really good example is like water staff on like support Ellie, where it's pretty good at doing what it's trying to do, and like you do get some little pieces here and there from the other elements to really finish the support, like the support build, the support playstyle, or the support kit, but you don't really get that much from like fire or air. And then Earth's pretty good, but like fire and air don't bring that much to the table for your support build. So if you could then play staff plus another weapon on like your water wizard, your water support build, it's a little spooky.
Yeah, I think to us the spooky part is the lack of like balancing levers that we have there. Like if it turns out that just getting 2 weapons of the same attunement is just so good that how do we tweak it without affecting other things because of that? And that's like kind of generally where it comes from. Like maybe increasing the weapon swap cooldown, but you know, I think the water example is specifically in like Worldly World, when in support all you really want to do is hit healing and cleanse. Or like maybe in PvE, just being water isn't enough in a lot of places, but there are places where it could be, and I think that's where, you know, thinking about the game in its entirety and all its modes does matter when thinking about like these huge trait designs and how they work.
Absolutely. And yeah, just to clarify, that wouldn't just be talking about PvE as well, by the way, chat. I think very notably, a build like that could potentially be really spooky in World versus World, right? Where if you could have, let's say, access to Staff and, let's say, Dagger with massive cooldown reduction, and the otter popping off. I mean, that's going to be pretty good.
You probably wouldn't get the cooldown reduction. Like, that was kind of the first question we asked when we were designing the trait was, well, can we give a weapon swap? And we decided pretty quickly that the answer is probably no. And so then the question was, well, how do we enable the single element playstyle to hopefully be viable? And, there's a lot of problems that players have like correctly identified with maybe like the water support build in PvE. But just being locked to a single element is a downside. Obviously, there's some players that just want that and not have the expectation of like swapping between attunements. But if we're going to make it a valid playstyle or a viable playstyle, there needed to be a little bit of extra. And so if the weapon swap was not the option, then it's like, okay, well now, since you're really leaning into this specific element, you get the faster familiar charge because you get to use your familiar more, which is kind of defining that element for your build as well, and then getting the cooldown reset in some capacity. We started it out with actually just a super high flat cooldown reduction, and it's just that is less interesting than build up to this moment of power of, okay, when I use my empowered familiar skill, then I get a big cooldown reset, and maybe that allows me to use another burst of skills immediately instead of just having like this super low weapon skill cooldown all the time. So I mentioned this on the preview stream too, where this is a trait where we're definitely still thinking about it, and it's very possible that like the current version of this trait is not quite powerful enough. It's not giving you enough back for the sacrifice of you can only play one element. And so that's something that we'll definitely be keeping an eye on in the beta and thinking about more going forward, because it's a really interesting trait because there are some players that are interested in that play style, and it's not necessarily something. It's such a big shift away from like how Elementalist was designed or plays in every other situation. So finding the right like bonus to that to make it's not necessarily going to be like best in slot in maybe any situation, but we want it to feel like you're not just like griefing yourself by playing that trait. If that's the way that you want to play Elementalist, it should be a semi-viable play style, and maybe every single element with every single element with every single weapon combination is not going to work as well. There's going to be very specific combinations of element and weapon choice where it's going to feel a bit better. But we're hoping that those choices do exist for each element. That's really what we're going for with the bonuses on that trait.
Yeah. It's an interesting question actually.
About conduit.
Oh yeah? Oh, do it. Bring it in. Give me the conduit question, SNEB.
This question's come up like at least 5 or 6 times that I've seen across social media and in the chat. People are kind of curious about the design decision, and to be clear, conduit's probably the one I know the least about, so I might butcher this, so forgive me. But my understanding is that essentially skills have different effects depending on what your other legend is, except the elite skill. It can change for any of them, but like your other skills, they only have a different like resonance effect if it's so like a bunch of your skills won't change in effect if you have like dwarf stance on. Is there a reason why you didn't just make it so like they all change depending on what stance you're on, so it's more uniform?
Well, the general idea was that there would be a baseline set of skills for the legend that is pretty flexible, so that would work with a lot of the different builds that you might try. And then the resonance component was supposed to be more of that, okay, well, the skill that is most aligned with your legend is kind of empowered, and it kind of gives you that extra power spike on that specific moment. Because our goal, and again, not saying that we hit our balance goal here, is that the resonant skill is going to be a little bit overtuned to what you might expect, and then like the rest of the kit is kind of the base power level. So we wanted to create like a more moment of power situation with like the specific skill that's getting empowered, as opposed to just like giving you not a completely different kit, but like a different flavor of all the skills on the kit. And that's not to say that we can't go back and do that after the beta either, but the initial intent is that you would get like this specific power spike around the thing that your build is trying to do the most, as as we're expecting based off your other legend. You know, Malix is going to be that Conde DPS, and then Joust is going to be like the more tanky bruiser playstyle. So that's kind of the thinking behind the Brazza legend for now.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was a really commonly asked question. So many people have questions about Conduit. I think the other one that people are really curious about is Antiquary in general. I think you've probably been like inundated with feedback about Antiquary. Do you have any like specific things? Because I know I asked before, like, was there any feedback that you received that you're going to act on? Is there anything specifically about Antiquary where you're like, oh, we've read that, we hear you, we're already looking at it?
I think Antiquary is one of the ones that we're kind of really hoping to get people's hands on it first, just because the biggest question mark to us, I mean, question mark is a strong word, but the thing that we're most interested in seeing the feedback around is like how the random elements of the Antiquary play, because there is obviously like the safeguards that have kind of been built into the spec with like the double edge mechanic. You don't have to press the double edge skill if you don't want to. You just let your skill recharge, always get that flat value, not worry about the random elements there. And then the adept traits are all adding some mitigation to like the pilfer randomness. So we're hoping that like these mitigations that are already in place are going to make the randomness feel more like a dynamic gameplay element than a thing that creates moments that feel really bad or feel really good. I mean, we're pretty happy if the moments feel pretty good, but if you low roll and get really unlucky and then it makes you really feel bad about playing the Antiquary, like those are the moments that we want to limit the most. But those are the things that you're really going to have to play and get your hands on to really experience them.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people might have their hearts a bit softened when they actually play it and they release the script. I think they'll enjoy that. I know, I'm looking forward to it. Like, I want to play more Amalgam, and I want to play I like way more Antiquary, because I think it's just really interesting.
Yeah.
It's very novel. Like, and I think maybe that's why there's kind of polarizing reactions to it, is that it is very different. So I think you're very correct that people just need to get their hands on it, and that's happening next week. Get ready.
What about you,
Sneb's
Sneb?
doing a way better job of plugging the beta than either of us.
The script.
Thanks, Sneb.
The other day, the script took everything from me. Okay, like this. I went to the script, cap in hand, and the script cleaned me out, dude. Okay, I had like 1,000 gold, and I trusted I trusted the script, and the script punished me. Okay, maybe I didn't believe enough, right? There's definitely a possibility of that.
Why did you go to the script, man? You can't do that. It's
Look,
not good.
After I was hyped after Antiquary, I'd like, yeah, the script is hot. That's what I thought. But unfortunately, it was stone cold. I have to tell you, man.
So you made a donation to the Antiquary Fund, is what you're saying.
Pretty much.
The Antiquary will go delving for treasures untold, and they go into this cavern, a tunnel even, and in it they find all of MightyTeapot's wealth. They stored it all away.
Yeah, apparently.
Let's see, I think there's a few more questions. Ooh, that's a good question. How much do play rates of classes affect design decisions? And I think what they mean by that is like, are you creating an elite spec to try to appeal to more PvE players to play Thief?
I think our goal with designing elite specs is that we want to make something that players love. And like, not all players will love every elite specs, because that's really not possible. Like, there are specs that most players generally like, but there's still players that don't like individual elite specs. And the thing that we're trying to do is like create new play styles or themes that players get really excited about. Like, if some percentage of the player base says, I love this elite spec, this is my new main, which, you know, we've seen a lot of feedback around these specs on various social media where it's like, that is the case. This is the new spec that I'm going to main. I don't care about any of the other ones anymore. That's great. Like, we want those strong reactions, because there are a lot of elite specs in the game now, and kind of the expectation is, I mean, obviously we want people to like the new elite specs and play the new elite specs and give us your feedback on the new elite specs, but we already know that they're not going to be for everyone, because we already see this with the current set of elite specs. It's not like all engineer players play Mechanist. There's a lot of engineer players that love playing Mechanist, and they play Mechanist like as their main elite spec. And then there's some that don't play Mechanist and they play Scrapper instead, or they play Hollowsmith instead. There's no elite spec that's going to be like the main elite spec of every single player of that profession or every single player in the game. So we're really just trying to make elite specs that give that same like strong response. I love this spec, I want to play this spec. And hopefully like a lot of people receive the specs that way, but some people are not going to be like as in love with every single elite spec that's made, and that's just kind of the reality of like our existing specs, existing professions. You know, I'm kind of talking in circles here, but our goal is to make new things that new people will love playing, and we've seen a lot of strong positive responses to basically every spec.
Yeah.
You know, there was a Reddit post that was like, all the elite specs are previewed. Which one are you most excited about? And I saw all 9 on like various posts. So that's pretty promising from our perspective.
Yeah, I think that's kind of that's part of making something that has a strong identity as well. And that's something that I think these elite specs very much deliver on, is that they all have a pretty strong thematic and gameplay identity. And that does, of course, mean that not everyone is going to like all of them. But the goal is obviously going to be that everyone likes some of them, right? Or as many of them as possible.
Yeah, it's kind of a...
What? Okay.
Oh, sorry. I was just kind of thinking
Oh,
how I was
no.
going to phrase this.
That's something extremely funny just happened. I fired the Gale Shot Elite into this
Yeah, where did
chat
you
that
go?
was reflecting, and it reflected me into the wall. That's
You know,
yeah,
Classic situation.
might need to make that skill unblockable.
yeah.
Okay, I see a question that I've seen asked a couple of times, and I guess I can like talk about it a bit. Is like they're just like, how do you guys decide which classes to give quickness and which ones to give alacrity to? And there's like a couple answers to it. I think the main one, especially with these, is just like thematics. Like when giving Gale Shot quickness, that was just like thematics. Like quickness just makes more sense to it. For like Paragon got alacrity and PvE because we knew that, you know, an alacrity heal was like deeply missed. In PvE specifically for Warrior. I think as we talked about open to changing some of them, like right now Troubadour has alacrity and we're still thinking about if it should be alacrity or quickness. And like for the Evoker, we gave alacrity on okay, I know what I need to fix when this is done.
What happened?
He got shot across the entire map. That was crazy. This is pretty good.
You too could get shot across the entire map next week.
Yeah, well, they don't have time to fix it. It's time. Log in.
That one will be in
Yeah.
at the start of the beta. Have fun.
I
What could go wrong in PvP with that one, Taylor?
Oh my god.
Watch out.
Probably aim for a really fast hotfix for that.
It's the new portal. You just reflect yourself across the map.
Yeah, the feeling around quickness and alacrity and getting them is definitely going to be another point we look at during the beta, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to like to reiterate what Taylor said, a lot of the time it's like thematics, like what makes sense to give quickness versus alacrity. Like I think the Evoker is a good example of this. People are like, well, why isn't it Otter gives quickness and Hare gives alacrity? Because that would be more in line with like the gaps in the Ellie's build kit. Like we already have a heal alacrity build and we already have like a power quickness build, but fundamentally it's like alacrity makes a lot more sense for water and quickness makes a lot more sense for air. So that is probably how it's going to be. And like we can still talk about it. We can still possibly adjust it in the future. It's just, it's more unlikely to happen than it is likely to happen because it is more of a strong thematic connection than simply just checking all the boxes for, you know, fill out the spreadsheet. These are the holes. fill the holes. It's more of like thematically, this is what makes sense.
This reference might not land, but like in my mind, like quickness is more Kiki and alacrity is more boba. Like alacrity is very flowing like water, relic of rivers, and then quickness has like some high increased action points. So that's why, you know, Gale Shot has it. And the water was the more alacrity on evoker stuff. So that's just like generally how we feel about those things and why we give them. But again, it's all in context.
I had no idea what you were talking about until you explained, so I'm glad. You know, it's like I was trying to land a plane and there was absolutely no landing strip in sight, but then you put one out for me, so I didn't crash into the water.
Go look up the Kiki and Boba experiment with kids. They gave them like two shapes, and one was like more rounded and one was more spiked, and they were like, name them. And everyone named the spike one Kiki and the round one Boba.
A boba?
Close.
Very close.
That is oddly close, yeah.
Okay. We still have a little bit of time left over, so any more questions? And I think, you know, we have been kind of delving into a couple of specific ones, so if people do have like specific questions, it's maybe something we could also explore as well on some of them. Because we just, you know, we've been leaping into it. We've been going crazy.
Yeah, we've broken the ice. We've already done it. We're going.
Oh yeah,
more specific.
yeah, okay. Luminary and burning, right? That is what people want to know. Why does the torch not set fire to people? What's the lore reason behind that?
So, can't answer the lore reason. It's not my area of expertise, unfortunately. But whether or not the spec needs like some burning attached, because you know, that could be an interesting like trait to enable more of a conditioned build where, you know, obviously you are swinging weapons of like flame and light around, so there could be some thematic burning aspects to that. It's not something that we really were. I don't know what the right phrasing is. It's not in for the beta, but if you're interested in that kind of playstyle for the Luminary, we can definitely like investigate some avenues to add some more of that Condi build for sure.
All right, I've got a hard hitting question here.
Oh yeah.
So
Heavyweight?
I am a Ritualist fan, right? I really liked Ritualist in Guild Wars 1, so I was really excited to see it make a resurgence, a comeback, if you will, in Guild Wars 2. However, when I look at the way that Guild Wars 1 Ritualist operated, it was very much about like set down those spirits and those spirits are with you until they die. But it seems like in Guild Wars 2, the iteration is like you have to be in Shroud unless you have that one trait. Is this more of like a balance rationale? Like if it was always up, it just would make it really hard to balance, or like kind of what's the deal with that? Because I know a lot of people, they kind of envisioned the gameplay as being perhaps the Minion Mancer-esque spec, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we thought about a lot as we were trying to translate Guild Wars 1 Ritualist to Guild Wars 2 as best as we could, because we wanted to, like, I mean, there's so many references and callbacks to it in the spec that I can't list them all, but we wanted to really capture the feeling of Guild Wars 1 Ritualist, because we know that so many people do really love that profession from Guild Wars 1. And spirits, we knew we wanted to do spirits, but the difficulty is that, you know, as you mentioned, Guild Wars 1 spirits are honestly not great gameplay wise for Guild Wars 2. And that's the thing that we have to think about when we're like trying to translate these mechanics is, does this work in Guild Wars 2? Because we could very much build the version where the spirits are exactly the same as they are in Guild Wars 1. And it would just be these stationary, you know, the offensive ones would essentially be turrets. They would be destroyable, stationary, periodic attacking summons. And then like the passive defensive ones could also be the case where, you know, they eat their health every time they heal someone or reduce damage from someone. We actually did try Shelter as one fun aside. Shelter was one of the original spirits that we tried, but it was very, very scary, and we ended up trying the mechanic on the elite skill instead, because it's a much more controlled environment. But going back to that, it's like the actual gameplay of Guild Wars 1 Spirits doesn't necessarily fit too well in Guild Wars 2. Like, we see turrets. Turrets do exist in Guild Wars 2, but they're not the most interesting gameplay-wise, and they are potentially even, like, problematic gameplay in a lot of situations, where finding the right balance between even just their health pool and their survivability really shifts. PvP is the easiest example here of where when NG turrets are too hard to kill and do too much damage, like, the game is very unpleasant for basically everyone else. And so we've seen that turrets are, it's something that we should be, and we do think about a lot of, like, can we, like, update turrets a little bit to make that gameplay a little bit better? But fundamentally, we don't necessarily like the gameplay of engineer turrets in a lot of situations. I think they're fine in certain situations, and there are cases where the engineer will just summon their turrets and fight in that area, and that feels good, that feels thematic. But if we're designing an elite specialization where the primary profession mechanic is going to be these spirits or these turrets, that's not something that we wanted to try to work with. Or we thought about it a lot, because that is being the truest version to Guild Wars 1, but we had a lot of concerns. And so we kind of moved to the Guild Wars 2 version of the spirits, which we see in a lot of professions already, with, like, ranger spirits. Mesmer Phantasms are a big inspiration for how the Shroud kit came together. And these are just more, like, active ways that these spirits can exist, and they still do have their lingering component where they will periodically attack or periodically heal the allies, but tying it into the Shroud there was that consideration of, like, the counterplay and the balance around that, for sure, because there is a much more controlled case of, well, if you push the Ritualist out of Shroud, then that is going to kill all the spirits, and we don't have to worry about balancing those individually. Does this one need more health? Does it need more armor? Does it mean, finding the pinpoint balance of that mechanic is extremely difficult, and is most likely to end up in a situation where the spirits are too easy to kill, because the alternative is that the alternative is the worst case of, if the spirits are too hard to kill or the turrets are too hard to kill, the gameplay is very problematic around them. So I think we ended up doing, like, a much more Guild Wars 2-ified version where they come in, they do their big attack. It's very much like a ranger spirit. The ranger spirits will do their little shake after they do their big attack, but the ritualist spirits will now do their periodic attacks, and they will exist as long as you have the life force to feed them. So that was a lot of words, but I hope it answered the question.
No, that's a really good answer. Yeah, that makes sense. It is a different game, right? The gameplay is a little bit different, so it would be, when I think about it, it would be kind of weird if, like, you could be, like, a little overpowered. Like, you've got, imagine PvP Ritualist with just mega overpowered spirits and minions just coming full force at you, or standing on the node. That could be a bit rough. I noticed there are some other questions that are, like, kind of talking about how other things will change as a consequence of elite specs. We addressed this briefly, but I know I've seen this question like 100 times on Reddit and stuff. People are asking specifically about Chrono. Chrono is so beloved. People love Chrono. They do not want it to change or whatever. Is it fair to say that you're just gonna have to take a look at the beta feedback, see how things shake out before any balance statements can really be made or decided upon?
Yeah, I think specifics, we really want to see where Troubadour lands and what it can do with, like, the kit it has now before we start adjusting the two. I think in, like, concept of Chrono, we want Chrono to be a support for sure. We don't want to, like, delete support Chrono from the game. But doing things like maybe lowering CC values on core Mesmer abilities, or lowering some healing on core Mesmer and putting it more into Troubadour, because as we keep mentioning, that Chrono has, like, C-Split, which can blow things out of the water a lot of the time, and so making it so that when you're really getting down to the fights where you want to pick a support for the specific things they do, you're looking at Chrono more for, like, the thing where, like, oh, I can double portal, or I can double this utility sometime, and not just, like, I can do that and also do everything better than everyone else. And in turn, looking at Chrono and kind of shifting more towards its identity, I think when we touched the master tier traits this last bounce patch, we touched danger time and everything, saw a lot of conversation about how like people didn't even want to take the trait because they just like improved alacrity that much. And so maybe when we get to move some support things off of Chrono so it can be more like that, we can do other things like maybe make improved alacrity a minor trait so that you don't have to take it. If it feels so necessary to the gameplay's identity that you can't do without it, then maybe it should be a minor trait. So those are just kind of like concepts floating in my head around Chrono and Troubadour and how they should land. And I think a lot of those changes will happen more towards like when Troubadour actually launches. We did like that one change to Bountiful Disillusionment for the beta so we can see how it plays. We wanted stability on that button to see if it feels good and just see Chrono a bit without that. So those are kind of just more of the changes is like Mesmer in the past year or two has gotten a lot of support put into its core trait lines and kind of just moving where that exists is kind of the overall concepts.
Yeah, the big point is like how much of the kit comes from the core profession, because as we see like these cases where there are now multiple elite specializations that are intended to be more of the supportive roles, then the question is, well, how do we create those unique identities for those different things? And because right now it's like Taylor said, a lot of the stuff is coming from the core kit of Mesmer, and we need to make sure that, you know, some aspects of the core kit do need to support builds. It kind of makes sense that if we have two different elite specs that are trying to be support builds, some of that will come from the core profession, but then also some of that will come from the unique elements of the two different elite specs to give them their different gameplay feels, their different gameplay like niches.
And I've seen also this question come up a couple times. Removing quickness or alacrity from Chronomancer is not something we're looking at. Chronomancer having the ability to do both is something we feel is like in its class identity and something we definitely want to keep. So just saw that a couple times. So that's not
that's getting clipped 100%.
Not a measure we're taking is
Yeah.
one of those.
I mean, it should be both. Let's be honest. It should be both simultaneously. Okay, we need to go back to the olden days.
Not at once.
Yeah, when you log into Chrono, you can only use Portal and Blink. That's it.
Yeah.
Everything else is disabled.
And look, it's gonna be amalgam. That's what we're gonna be doing. We're gonna be stacking amalgams now. You can do both with one of the if you combine the right morph skills together. And that, look, what could possibly go wrong?
It'll be very interesting to see people play with that amalgam trait.
Might be keeping a close eye on that.
Very close eye on it.
Everyone's favorite phrase.
Okay.
I don't know, is it a better phrase than laying the groundwork? That's the real question.
You've got to have like a good...
I like it's on the table.
We've laid a lot of groundwork.
It's always on the table,
Yeah. It's important that it's on the table. It's got to be.
Yeah. Can't pick anything up off the ground. That's impossible.
Yeah, it cannot be done. Let's see, we got any other questions? Get them in while you can. I think we've got around 15 minutes. So you better get some good ones.
Take a couple more.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Ooh, this is interesting. Are we going to see a paradigm shift in boon coverage at Visions of Eternity launch? A lot of the new specs specifically for PvE support are lacking boons in comparison to current support specs? ?
I think a lot of that comes just like the tuning, what we see during the beta. A lot of the time when we're designing it, we're thinking about the feel of the skill more, and less than like making sure every checkbox is checked. There are a lot of things that come from core kits, so seeing what exactly is missing from like Boker support, for example, is definitely something we're keeping an eye on and making sure that they do have the tools that we expect from the support. So some things are missing currently, and we are keeping an eye on it. That's, basically just what I'll say is like we know some of the support tools are missing, some of them, and after the beta we'll address them how we feel best.
Yeah, like I said before, some of that might be, adjusting what the core profession has access to as well. Maybe core LE needs some sort of AoE support or AoE stab. Obviously not something that we're committing to, but it's like an interesting thought as opposed to well, we could just slap on AoE stab to like the Earth utility or put it in a trait somewhere, but we could also potentially add that to the core profession, and then, well, does Tempest have too much stability now? Maybe it needs to be shuffled around a little bit, where maybe Tempest doesn't need it specifically on its skills anymore, and it could be given to core LE, which opens the door for some interesting ideas for maybe even like Catalyst. So yeah, not locking anything in, of course, but like these are the things that we will be thinking about as we look to flesh out these kits where they're lacking. It's like, does it need to be on the elite spec? Should it be on the core profession instead? And what impact would those ideas have?
Okay. Oh, well, okay. This is one that might be a little bit too spicy, actually. Now, but let's have a go. Like, how many? Basically, the gist of the question is like, were there other ideas for elite specializations that didn't quite make it to this version of the game?
I don't know if we'll touch on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more just like this set of elite specs. I think came together pretty easy. Is a weird word, but it felt like it was very much. We started with the idea of the Tyrian Alliance and like how do we grab these different places of the world and make specs for them, and I think the initial themes, from what I'm remembering, at least Taylor, maybe you can correct me, like the initial themes that we came up with, everyone was like really excited about it. Like, obviously, the gameplay still had to be figured out, but I think for this set, all 9 of the themes were kind of like the first idea that everyone was like, "Wow, that's awesome! Let's do that."
Yeah, I think some of the themes maybe took a while to like come together than others. Like I think the amalgam when we started thinking about it, it wasn't exactly like the metal slime shapeshifter, but we wanted to do something more in like a biology realm of the alchemy part of engineer. But I think like the core kind of vibe of them all was pretty similar to what we started off with.
Cool. You see anything that catches your eye, SNEB, from the chat?
Yes. Yeah,
He does.
There's one person that asked a question, and then somebody replied and said they will never answer this. And so I went, you know what? I am 100% asking that question now. People are curious about sort of the design direction and what the intended role is for something like Antiquary. And then I guess the follow-up question is there a world where it is also like a support class?
I think full support for Antiquary is unlikely, but adding something, I think we even talked about like maybe changing a trait to allow some like boon support in a PvE setting is reasonable. A lot of it, I mean, as we've talked about, a lot of Antiquary is like an unknown quantity. Hopefully, like DPS is probably in PvE the one you'd slot it into first, and just seeing what you can do with it. And I think from there, seeing the ideas, seeing what we should lean into with it, and what's like almost on like the cusp of existing, and if we just support it a bit more, then we can make an identity there. Is definitely something we'll be looking at.
And I think it definitely.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, it definitely started out as just the DPS class, because that is kind of the most guaranteed baseline that you can have for like all of the artifacts is that they do some amount of damage. Whereas like if you're trying to play this as like a healer, then there's going to be like specific things that if they come from artifacts, like you are going to have cases where you just get unlucky. It's like, oh, I need stab. I need the stab artifact right now. Give it to me. And then you miss it, and then you don't give stab, and then you die. Everyone dies. But like DPS, there's a guarantee that every skill that you grab is going to have like some aspect of damage to it. So it's just a lot more of there's more general expectations as opposed to like the more specific aspects. And that's not to say that we can't do it, because there's like, we could do it with a trait hook, or we could do it with like utility skills that specifically give those key boons or that key healing. but definitely starting as the DPS because that is like the most consistent. And we wanted to have the flavor of like the power DPS and the Connie DPS, but it is very much like the most consistent build that could exist in the world of the randomness. So that was kind of the starting point for sure.
Okay.
I have there's a couple like I don't even know if I can ask these questions, but maybe I'll try it and you'll just if you can't
We
answer
can
it, just
definitely
let me know.
say not gonna answer that question.
Yeah, okay, good. Then I'll just give it a go. Like there's a question that I actually thought was quite good. When you consider some of the PvP, and I feel like this was actually already mentioned, but when you consider some of the PvP titles now, some of them feel a bit weird. Like the Paragon one is on Guardian. Is that something that you might think, oh, like now that we have these elite specs that have these names, maybe we should adjust the titles so they're more thematically relevant?
I would say that the expectation is that it is unlikely that we would change an existing title because players have this title, and like if the title that you liked randomly changed to something else and then you had to go unlock this other title because it's now in a different profession, like that kind of feels bad. But you can obviously go unlock that title and wear it on your correct, quote unquote, correct profession if you really want to. But and this is just like my initial thought. I'm not saying like this is exactly what's going to happen, but it's likely that those titles will not change.
That makes sense. Oh, this is a good question too. Is there anything that maybe you anticipated that we would ask or that we haven't asked that you're actually eager to talk about?
I didn't bring any content to the stream. You guys are the content. I'm just answering questions.
Yeah, I think I could go into like specifics about a lot of things, but trying to keep it more broad, I guess. So, I mean, I could talk about all of the specs forever. They're also interesting to me, like how we came up with like Troubadour Tales, or how we decided what the spirits to do for Evoker. There's just a lot of things.
How many times will Taylor say Bard? Is the real question. Anyone have the counter?
It's not gonna end.
Like what,
It's
4 or
not
5?
gonna end.
Bard.
Somebody asked about how you come up with everything. We did actually ask that earlier in the stream, so you have to maybe check the VOD and rewind after, because they did talk a bit about sort of the design space and how they come up with ideas and whatnot. Let's see. Oh man, there's so many good questions. I think we have time for like one more really solid question. Everybody spam your questions. I'm gonna just like
Better
pick
be
one.
good. It better be a
It's
good
gotta
one.
be good. You gotta hit the home run here. Like the best questions gotta be asked right now.
I've maybe got an interesting question actually. So when you're putting these together, are there like go-to scenarios where you play around with stuff? Like, is it kind of what we see on some of the streams, like messing around with golems and just testing out abilities? Do you guys like hop into a raids and PvP, like all that kind of stuff? Like, is there any kind of like go-to process there on seeing how it actually plays out within the test environment?
Yeah, I think when I'm making mine, I'm like constantly like in the PvP lobby, just like hitting a golem with the abilities as it makes sense. And then we have play tests, like go roam through the open world or do like a world boss with them, maybe even do some small scale content to make sure like the feel is there, because it's really important. You can make all the skills and then you go and like play it in the open world, you're like, wow, this feels bad, and then you go make it better. It's a really important part. That did happen a couple of times. I think like Hawkeye on Gale Shot had like 3 different iterations before it is what it is now, and a lot of it was because just like playing around with it, and like maybe when like I'm hitting the golem, it's like, oh, this feels fine, but then when I'm like moving around doing other things, like the hitches start appearing, and so you're just like, oh, how can I change to make it feel better? And then getting feedback from everyone else that's playtesting it.
You know, the chat, you know, look, this is such a Twitch chat classic. Like, you know, when we ask for questions, do you know what people do? They immediately start talking about stuff completely unrelated to the topic. Okay, like that.
Yeah.
I love this.
I was just waiting for people
Okay.
to spam a boba.
They will go out of their way to ask stuff. Yeah, like unrelated to the elite specializations. This is, come on.
Like, why doesn't Taylor have any books on his bookshelf?
My real bookshelf is
that is a good
actually
question,
in another room.
Yeah.
Oh, there's an Eevee.
I think he
That's
just
good.
cleared out because it was all anime. It was all weeb stuff. It was all weeb stuff. He didn't want to show it on stream. Get
We
exposed.
get some wide Boris in the chat. That's my favorite Twitch emote. What do you guys like?
I mean, I saw this question about the amalgam contagious mutation thing,
Yeah.
where they're like, obviously you can do quickness with alacrity, that's super scary. And, you know, say the line, we're going to keep an eye on it, but I think, like, with this, as I talked about in the initial stream, you have to give up a lot to take this trait, and we don't expect, like, 100% time. Amalgam is not supposed to be a support. It's not meant to give 100% time with these things. This trait's more, it's similar like Soul Beast's, like, stance share, where it's, like, very conditional. Sometimes it's, like, super good, but maybe not always what you want. Like, the more skills do a lot of damage, and take the alacrity one, for example, it doesn't do damage. So you're giving up a lot to be able to provide these boons. And to like actually get good uptime, you're probably have to stack them. So there are like measures in place, but again, we don't want sharing like both features of alacrity feature reveal from like one spec. So
Yeah.
keeping an eye on it.
Let's.
All right, I think we have time for one more final question. I'm going to give people like 10 seconds to quickly just spam some more questions. If I see one randomly, I'll just kind of pick it. Oh man, there's so many. Okay.
Let's see. Have we got anything good?
Just giving it a second.
All right, you get to pick one. Pick one, SNEB. It's on you. You get the last one.
I saw
Let's
this
go.
question come up a couple times.
Do it.
The people are kind of curious about how you work with other people on your team, like particularly, the artists that are coming up with the skills and the icons and then how like the sound designers. How do you all work as a team to make the elite spec really have that true identity?
It's really it's a lot of collaboration. Like we obviously as the designers will build out the core concept and like here's all the skills, here's how they work, and then we go in with like a vague understanding a lot of the time of like, okay, this is what we think it should look like, or like these are the things that we're trying to communicate, and then like visual effect artists, for example, will kind of take that and then start working on what it's actually going to look like. And then we have a lot of back and forth during that process where the artist will have an idea or a thought about like what they're working on or like what the skill is doing, and it's like, well, what if it looked like this instead? It's slightly different from like your initial idea, but I think this could be really cool, and or we could like really tie the theme together by doing these different things on all these different skills. And like, I don't know, elite specs are like such a massive project from like so many different departments that it really is that cross-team collaboration that makes them the best versions of themselves. Like if all that happened was that the design team said, here's an elite spec, here's all the assets we need for it, build them, give them back to us, we'll hook them up, the elite specs would not even be close to as awesome as they all are. So like, I don't know, cross-team collaboration is a huge part of obviously just game design in general, but especially for like something as specific as the elite specs, where like each individual moment, each individual skill matters so much to like how the gameplay feels, how the theme all comes together, that I don't know. It's hard to say that it's more important than in general, but it is like it's so extremely important. So I know that I love it, and like all the designers on our team love working with all the different art teams and all the different audio teams to really bring these things to life.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I think that's a
Thank you
fantastic
both.
place to end on it. Yeah, oh yeah, please go ahead, introduce us, SNEB. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. All I want to say was thank you. I think one of the coolest, this is one of the coolest opportunities I've had. I think it's really exciting to be able to ask these questions and you know, just like ask the questions of the community, right? People on Reddit, people on social media. I was looking up questions everywhere. I was trying to read the chat as best I could and maybe combine some questions. I hope we did you justice, Guild Wars 2 community, because I know you have a lot of questions about this and are just as excited as we are. So thank you to both Cal and Taylor for answering all these questions and diving into some of the specifics, which were really cool to hear about. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I mean, like Taylor said, we can talk about Guild Wars 2 skill design for way too long. We'd probably fall asleep before we ran out of topics. But you know, maybe we can do it again sometime. And it doesn't have to be about elite spec specifically. We just talk about like live balance or you know whatever. It's a lot of fun. Like it's a nice change of pace. Obviously, we're just kind of waiting for the beta to start. I've got a few things to do this afternoon that aren't super important, so it's really fun to sit here and hang out with some of the content creators, and obviously with chat. The chat is what makes streams really happen. Without the chat, there is no
Guild Wars
stream.
community is the
Exactly.
best.
Yeah, we love the chat here. And, you know, honestly, I think they've been pretty well behaved. Good job, guys. Okay, well done. Well
Actually,
I
done.
can't keep
I
up
thought
with
they
the
were gonna
shared
be way more
chat.
unhinged.
Though.
I mean, the
It's
shared
too fast.
the shared chat
Too
is crazy because one thing we didn't anticipate here is that all of like the Twitch bots we have that like post social media and stuff, they were also cross-posting in like every stream at the same time. So it gets really chaotic
great.
when you when you have the bots going at the same time. Like, it's just funny. And like, you know, we got to get some 7 TV votes enabled on the Guild Wars 2 chat. Like the Guild Wars 2 chat, we're missing out here. Okay, we've got a lot of good emotes here.
But we are nothing.
But anyway, yes, we need to be heading off, so we are going to vanish into the ether. Oh, yeah, I really want to echo exactly what SNEB said. Thank you so much, Trig and CMC, for joining us today. And indeed, you know, letting us actually go on stream here and show off some of these specs, battle the frog, launch ourselves into the stratosphere with the Gale Shot. That's an intended mechanic, guys. That's making it to live. We love to see that.
100%.
Yeah.
That one's intended. If anyone figures out the bug where the rabbit doesn't shrink again, let me know.
Yeah, so thank you so much. It was a lot of fun, really interesting stuff. And yeah, we obviously hope to do more of this sort of thing in the future. It's always an absolute pleasure to have not only the streams that you do on the official Guild Wars 2 channel, but also kind of some collaborative stuff like this. It's always a really big pleasure to do that. And you know what? Maybe one day, we can have Roy on as well to have the true return to form,
I'm surprised you
return
didn't
to
call
glory.
in.
Yeah, where is
Stream
he?
together.
Yeah, this
I
guy.
just called in.
Yeah. But anyway,
Unbelievable.
I think with that, we will vanish off into the ether.
Final shout out to the Guild Wars 2 community. Thank you everybody for asking great questions everywhere. I think this was really, really cool, and we got a lot of interesting insight because of your participation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, big shout out to the community. You know, the feedback that you guys give during the beta as well is going to be just another component that makes these elite specs the best versions of themselves for launch. I mean, they won't be perfect, and you know, we're going to do our best and improve them all the ways that we can. But your guys' feedback from the beta is going to be super valuable.
I feel like Trig has one final thing to say.
Yeah,
I don't think
play
he
the
does.
beta on
I'm
Wednesday.
cutting the stream off right now.
Play the beta on Wednesday. Give your beta characters good names. I want to see good ones. No key smashes.
All right, that's a good wrap. Thanks everyone for
that's a
coming.
wrap. See ya
we'll
in
you
the
next week during the beta.
mist.
Yes, of course.
In the mist.